Imagine you're renovating a house, right? And you decide you want this place to be perfectly, 100% eco-friendly.
Right, you're going all out.
Exactly. You pull out all the stops. You're putting in triple glazed windows, massive solar arrays on the roof, maybe a state-of-the-art geothermal heat pump in the yard.
Sounds pretty expensive.
Oh, totally. But on paper, your carbon footprint is zero. So, it feels like a total victory. But then, and here is the catch, you start looking at the actual physical receipts.
And you don't mean the dollar amounts.
Right. Not the money, the energy receipts. Because you suddenly realize that the diesel burned by the bulldozers grading your yard, or the intense industrial heat needed to make those complex silicon solar cells.
Even the maritime shipping to get the materials there.
Yes, all of that consumed massive amounts of energy. So much, in fact, that it might take your shiny new eco house like a decade just to break even on the energy it costs to build.
It's a huge hidden cost.
It really is. Now, take that exact scenario, scale it up to the size of the entire planet, and you are staring directly at the fundamental dilemma of the global energy transition.
Yeah, it's the invisible ledger that governs literally everything we build.
And welcome to today's deep dive, where we're going to explore that exact ledger because we get so, hyper-focused on the financial cost of deploying a green grid that we often completely ignore the physical raw materials costs.
Right, we forget that the universe operates on strict laws of thermodynamics. We have to spend energy to make energy.
Always.
And if a society spends more energy building its power plants than those plants ultimately give back, well, the entire system just grinds to a halt. It doesn't matter how many trillions of dollars you try to throw at it.
It's just raw physics.
Yeah.
And looking past those dollars and cents to examine the unforgiving physics of our future power grid, that is our core mission today.
That's a massive question.
Existential, really. Are 100% renewable energy systems actually viable to build? Or will the act of constructing them literally bankrupt our global energy reserves?
To get that answer, we really have to pull apart the math.
And luckily, we have an incredibly comprehensive analysis to help us do that. For you listening, the specific source we are diving into today is titled System-Wide Energy Return on Investment for Power Systems.
And what makes this study so groundbreaking is that it finally establishes the real math. For decades, this whole debate around renewable energy has been plagued by just really fragmented, siloed data.
Yeah, everyone had their own numbers.
Exactly. You had critics claiming solar panels take more energy to make than they produce, but they were basing that on manufacturing data from like the 1990s.
Right, totally outdated.
And then on the flip side, you had advocates painting this utopian picture, but they'd conveniently ignore the massive energy cost of manufacturing utility-scale batteries.
So this study basically sweeps all of that aside.
It does. It gives us a holistic, system-wide view of what a global transition truly demands, in terms of physical energy.
So for you listening, what does this all mean for the grid powering your city right now? Like, whether you're a local policymaker figuring out zoning for a wind farm or just someone trying to make sense of the news about energy independence, this deep dive is going to give you the ultimate mental framework.
A real shortcut to understanding it all.
Exactly. We are decoding the true energy math of the future economy. But before we can look at that future grid, we actually have to fix how we measure it.
Which is crucial.
Because, as this study points out, previous research was basically comparing apples to oranges. They were using completely different definitions of what even counts as an investment.
Yeah, so the core metric we're working with here is called EROI, which stands for Energy Return on Investment.
And historically, calculating that has been a mess. Right?
Oh, it was the Wild West. Different research teams would just draw completely different boundaries, like some teams only looked at the energy burned at the power plant itself.
Which seems way too narrow.
It is. And other teams tried to be more thorough. They'd include the energy used to mine the copper for the transmission wires, but then their methodologies would completely clash with the first group.
So how does this study fix that?
It tames the chaos by using a rigorous system-wide approach combined with a metric called cumulative energy demand, or CED.
Cumulative energy demand. Got it.
Right. And this accounts for every single drop of direct and indirect energy input over a technology's entire life cycle. I'm talking from the initial extraction of raw materials to the construction, the operation, and the eventual decommissioning.
Okay, let's unpack this because standardizing all of those disparate energy sources is where the math gets really clever.
It's fascinating.
Think of it like a currency exchange. If you are holding, say, 100 pesos, 100 euros, and 100 yen, you wouldn't just add the bills together and declare you have 300 units of equal wealth.
Right, because the values are totally different.
Exactly. You have to convert them all to a standard currency, like a baseline dollar, just to know your actual buying power.
And energy functions the exact same way.
Right. A lump of coal, a gust of wind, a ray of sunshine, they all contain energy, but they're vastly different qualities of energy. Extracting them requires different amounts of effort.
Which brings us to what this study actually does. It creates an energy exchange rate. It standardizes all primary energy into electricity equivalent joules.
And that conversion process is absolutely crucial, isn't it?
Oh, totally. To build this standard currency, the researchers applied specific conversion factors to different primary energy sources. They detail this in Table 9.1 of this study.
Which is super detailed.
Yeah, they pulled massive amounts of data
Mm.
from global life cycle assessment databases to figure out these exchange rates. It puts everything on a perfectly level playing field by standardizing it at the final electricity level.
And honestly, looking at the numbers in that table, it completely flips conventional wisdom on its head.
It really does.
When you look at their conversion factors, solar PV and wind power get this really high factor. They sit at 0.9.
Right, almost 1-to-1.
But then you look at fossil fuels, the bedrock of our modern grid, and they sit way down at zero point 0.4. And I think my biggest surprise was geothermal energy. It is remarkably low, down at just zero point 0.1.
Yeah, that catches a lot of people off guard.
Why is there such a massive penalty on something like geothermal compared to wind?
Well, it all comes down to the sheer mechanical effort required to access the resource versus the direct efficiency of conversion.
Okay, that makes sense for me.
So wind and solar are highly efficient at converting their primary captured energy, like the movement of air or the sun's radiation, directly into an electrical current. The fuel basically comes to you.
Right.
Fossil fuels, however, sit at 0.4 because you have to expend a massive amount of energy just to find them. You pump them, refine them, transport them across oceans.
And you just burn them.
Exactly. You burn them in thermal plants that lose a huge percentage of their potential energy simply as waste heat straight out the smokestack.
It's like having a $100 bill, but it's locked inside a heavy titanium safe. You have to spend $50 worth of energy just cutting the safe open.
That is a perfect analogy.
Whereas wind is like pennies constantly raining down on your roof. You just have to put up a net to catch them.
Exactly.
But that brings me back to the geothermal number. A zero point 0.1 conversion factor just seems brutal for a clean energy source.
It does. But think about the physics. Geothermal is incredibly reliable, sure, but accessing it requires battling the Earth's crust.
Oh, right. The drilling.
You're dealing with intensely energy-heavy drilling operations. You have to bore through thousands of feet of solid bedrock. You're constantly circulating cooling fluid, deploying massive steel casings.
That sounds exhausting just listing it out.
It is. You have to build complex surface facilities just to capture the heat. So the upfront physical energy investment is astronomical relative to the steady but comparatively small trickle of electrical output it generates.
Okay, that makes sense. But wait, if we invent better drill bits for geothermal or figure out cheaper manufacturing processes for solar cells, won't these static numbers in the study become obsolete pretty quickly?
That's actually a really important question about forecasting, and the study authors directly acknowledge this. They know that technological advances and better supply chain efficiencies will progressively lower that cumulative energy demand over time.
So things will get cheaper to build, energetically speaking.
Yes. However, if they introduced dynamic, constantly fluctuating conversion factors into their models right now, the baseline comparisons would become this chaotic moving target.
Ah, so you wouldn't be able to compare anything accurately.
Right. These static factors provide a highly robust interim baseline. They allow us to objectively compare the physics of a solar panel and a coal plant as they actually exist today.
Got it. Okay, so we have our standardized energy currency. We know exactly how to measure the joules we're spending versus the joules we're getting back. But having a currency is only half the battle, right? Now we have to look at the shipping routes. Because the way we physically map the transmission grid entirely dictates whether this math works in our favor.
Oh, absolutely. Spatial representation is the silent make-or-break variable in all of this energy modeling.
Because location matters.
Hugely. If your computer model doesn't accurately reflect the physical geography of, mountains, borders, and weather patterns,
Mm.
your energy return calculations are going to be wild mathematical fantasies.
And the researchers illustrate this beautifully, don't they? By comparing different modeling scenarios specifically for the European power system.
They do. And this is where researchers usually fall into a trap. They often use what's called a single-node model.
Right, which basically treats all of Europe as one giant aggregated blob on a map.
Exactly. It assumes that if a wind turbine is spinning in Scotland, you can instantaneously move that power to a toaster in southern Italy with zero friction and zero infrastructure bottlenecks.
Which is just not how reality works.
No. And as the study clearly points out, that single-node approach completely masks the reality of regional weather variations.
Yeah.
It artificially inflates the EROI because it just ignores the physical reality of moving electricity.
Because electricity doesn't just teleport.
Right, it doesn't. In the real world, smoothing out the massive variability of renewable resources across a continent requires significant physical transmission infrastructure.
And that infrastructure costs energy to build.
Exactly. That's why this study contrasts that unrealistic single-node blob with multi-node models. They divided Europe into 20 distinct interconnected subregions.
And doing that spatial division exposes a massive physical danger, which I found fascinating. The danger of isolation.
Oh, it's a huge issue.
Like, when politicians in your state or country start pounding the podium talking about energy independence, they are usually proposing a completely isolated grid, closing off the borders, relying solely on local generation.
Right, playing it solo.
And the researchers actually ran this scenario in their multi-node model. They modeled regions that were totally independent, meaning zero electricity trading was allowed across borders. Like, if you have France, you only use French power.
And the results are pretty stark.
Stark is an understatement. When they ran that isolation scenario, the system-wide EROI absolutely plummeted. It crashed from a healthy 24 down to 14 by the year 2050.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason for that crash makes perfect physical sense. When a region isolates itself, it still carries the absolute burden of guaranteeing the lights stay on 24 hours a day,
Right.
regardless of what the weather is doing overhead.
Right. You can't just tell hospitals, sorry, no wind today.
Exactly. So if you cannot import power from a neighbor when your local wind dies down, you are forced to massively overbuild your own generation capacity.
So you're building stuff you don't even need most of the time.
Yes. You might have to build 3 wind turbines when you normally only need 1 just to ensure you catch enough breeze on a calm day. And you have to manufacture mountains of redundant batteries.
Which brings us back to the energy cost.
Right. All of that extra overlapping infrastructure requires a colossal upfront investment of energy to build, which mathematically drags your overall return down to that abysmal 14 mark.
It's amazing. It proves that energy independence might be a catchy political slogan, but for you listening from a physics perspective, it requires a massive, inefficient waste of energy.
It really does.
The alternative the study presents is the interconnected multi-node scenario. When those 20 subregions are linked by robust transmission lines and they freely trade electricity, the EROI stays much higher and more stable, hovering around 18.
Because you're sharing the burden.
Right. If a massive cloud cover blankets Germany, they don't need a million extra batteries. They just import wind power from Denmark. Sharing power across borders saves us from physically overbuilding.
Interconnection is honestly the ultimate efficiency hack for the grid. It allows different geographic zones to balance each other out organically.
Okay, so sharing power solves the spatial problem and keeps the return on investment high. But, and there's always a but, that sprawling, interconnected web creates a completely new vulnerability.
Right, because what happens when the weather doesn't cooperate anywhere?
Exactly. What happens when a massive winter weather front stalls over all of northern Europe for a week? The wind stops, the sun is blocked, and 50 or 60% of that shared grid goes dark.
Yeah, that's the nightmare scenario.
You can't just spin up a natural gas plant anymore in a purely renewable system. And this leads to a truly fascinating trend in the study. The EROI doesn't just climb forever.
No, it doesn't.
Across almost all the transition scenarios they ran, the return on investment rises, it peaks around the year 2025, and then it actually begins to decline.
Which is a really counterintuitive moment in the data, but it highlights a critical threshold.
Wait, does this mean the more renewable energy we build, the worse our return on investment gets?
Well, not exactly forever, but yes, for a period. What's fascinating here is exactly when this decline begins. The study pinpoints it precisely. The EROI starts to drop the moment Variable Renewable Energy VRE, which is essentially just wind and solar crosses the 50% penetration mark on the grid.
50%, that's the tipping point.
Yes. Up to that 50% point, the existing grid infrastructure can largely absorb the natural fluctuations of the weather. But the moment you cross that threshold, the fundamental architecture of the system has to change to prevent blackouts.
Because at that point, the entire grid relies on the weather and you need long-term backup.
Right. You can't just rely on the active flow anymore.
The study points to a suite of technologies required to handle this, specifically diurnal batteries for day to night shifts, seasonal storage for the winter months, and something broadly called Power to X.
Yes, Power to X.
Let's look at the physics of Power to X, because converting surplus wind electricity into synthetic fuels or hydrogen gas, that sounds incredibly lossy from a thermodynamic standpoint.
It is intensely lossy, and that is exactly why the EROI drops.
Ah!
Power to X means taking excess electricity when the wind is howling and no one is using it, and forcing it through an industrial process to create a storable medium.
Like hydrogen.
Right. For example, using electricity to separate water molecules into hydrogen gas through electrolysis. Then you have to compress that gas, build massive pressurized tanks to store it.
That's a lot of steps.
It is. And every single time you change energy from one state to another, from electrical to chemical to kinetic, the laws of thermodynamics demand a toll. You lose massive amounts of energy simply as waste heat at every single step of that process.
Not to mention the physical energy required to actually build those electrolysis plants and storage tanks in the first place.
Right. The infrastructure cost is huge.
You are paying a huge physical toll just to build the backup system for the times when the wind doesn't blow. So your total energy investment skyrockets, which pulls your return ratio down.
Exactly. It represents the growing pains of the transition. Society essentially has to absorb a massive upfront energy cost to build a bridge to a stable, clean grid.
But the study reveals a light at the end of the tunnel, right? The EROI does not drop indefinitely into a death spiral.
No, thankfully. The bleeding eventually stops.
The models show that once variable renewable energy penetration exceeds 70% and all of that heavy infrastructure for seasonal storage and Power to X reaches a natural saturation point, the decline halts.
Right, because you've finally built the system.
Exactly. The massive heavy lifting of building the new system is finished, the infrastructure is in place, and the return on investment finally stabilizes. It can even begin to improve again as supply chains get more efficient.
It perfectly mirrors a classic investment curve.
Yeah.
You take a deliberate temporary hit to your returns in order to secure a much more resilient, self-sustaining asset for the long term.
Right. Short-term pain for long-term gain.
Exactly. But this dynamic introduces a crucial new variable into our mental framework, and that is time.
Time.
Yeah, we understand the grid needs to be interconnected, and we know we have to push through the painful storage tipping point. But the speed at which we force this transition changes the math entirely.
We have to build this massive bridge, but how fast do we lay the bricks?
Exactly.
Because rushing things places unimaginable stress on global supply chains. The study models several different global transition speeds. On the aggressive side, you have the best policy scenarios, or BPS, which model a rapid forced transition to hit ambitious climate targets by 2030 or 2035.
Very fast.
And then on the other side, you have more gradual phased approaches, like the transition models from the International Energy Agency or the TESC and DLR models.
And when you look at the data from the aggressive BPS models, you see wild physical fluctuations.
Because we're trying to do too much too fast.
Exactly. Attempting to force a global infrastructure overhaul in a highly compressed time frame pushes raw physical labor and material extraction to the breaking point. To measure this strain, the researchers tracked an indicator called annual energy flow, or AEF. This is different from ERI.
How so?
While EROI looks at the total return over the entire 30-year lifespan of a power plant, the annual energy flow measures the acute energy burden in a single specific year.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is such a critical distinction. Like, if you build a massive hydroelectric dam, the EROI over a century might be fantastic.
Right.
But in the specific year that you are mixing thousands of tons of concrete, mining the rebar, and running all that heavy machinery, your society has to front an enormous amount of physical energy.
Yes.
If you build too many dams at the exact same time, you might literally starve the rest of your economy of the energy it needs to function that year.
That is the exact vulnerability the AEF metric exposes. In the rush transition scenarios, the AEF indicator for specific developing regions actually plummets,
Like where?
like SARC, which includes India and South Asia, and the MENA region, encompassing the Middle East and North Africa. Their AEF actually drops below 5 around the year 2030.
Below 5. That sounds bad.
It is. That means they are diverting a dangerously high percentage of their available everyday energy away from their general economy and pouring it solely into frantic capacity expansion.
It's a massive societal stress test. But
Yeah.
the models do show they survived the sprint, right? With the AEF recovering to above 8 in the following decades once the heavy construction phase ends.
Yeah, they bounce back.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The study dives into the regional quirks of this transition, proving it won't be a copy-paste job across the globe. Geography plays favorites.
Oh, absolutely.
Take South America, for example, because they already have a massive pre-existing baseline of hydropower infrastructure. When they simply layer new solar and wind on top of it, their regional EROI shoots up to an incredible 32.
That's huge. It is basically a geographic cheat code.
A cheat code, exactly. They're heavily leveraging a high-return asset that is already built and paid for in terms of energy.
But the study also flags severe geographic pitfalls. In several scenarios modeled for Eurasia and parts of Africa, heavy investment in technologies like large-scale geothermal or uh, concentrated solar power, CSP, actually drag their overall regional ERIs down significantly.
And concentrated solar power is the technology that uses massive arrays of mirrors to bounce sunlight up to a central tower, melting salt to create steam, right?
That's the one.
It sounds incredibly futuristic, but again, the physics are punishing. Building a sprawling field of precision mirrors, constructing a giant concrete tower, and refining all that specialized molten salt. That requires a staggering amount of upfront energy compared to just rolling out standard photovoltaic solar panels in the desert.
It serves as a stern warning for policymakers.
Yeah.
A truly affordable and physically viable transition demands ruthless prioritization of low-cost, high-return technologies.
You can't just build the cool-sounding stuff.
Right. You have to lean on standard solar PV and wind power as the foundation, strategically paired with power-to-X storage, rather than getting distracted by highly complex, energy-dense vanity projects.
But there is a very tempting trap that the researchers warn about regarding the speed of the transition. If a region gets nervous about the dropping EROI during that 50% storage tipping point, they might decide to keep fossil fuels operating on the grid a little bit longer just to ease the burden.
Right, just to smooth it out.
And mathematically, that actually works in the short term. Keeping coal or gas plants online provides a temporary artificial bump to their EROI.
It makes the immediate math look slightly more comfortable, yeah. But it creates profound long-term vulnerability.
Because you're still relying on the old system.
Exactly. That temporary bump is entirely reliant on the continued extraction of finite resources. If you prop up your grid's energy return with natural gas, you remain permanently tethered to resource depletion, global price shocks, and, fragile supply chains.
Which defeats the purpose.
The study is unequivocal. True, lasting resilience only comes from transitioning fully away from finite stocks. A society must be willing to absorb that temporary drop in ERI while building out the renewable infrastructure in order to secure permanent stability.
So we have explored the standardized currency, the necessity of mapping interconnected highways instead of isolated grids, the thermodynamic toll of the 50% tipping point, and the dangers of rushing the global clock.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. But when you synthesize all of this, the ultimate conclusion of the study is remarkably optimistic, but it is deeply grounded in hard physics.
Yes.
A 100% renewable energy system is unequivocally techno-economically feasible on a global scale. Yes, the physical energy costs of building millions of batteries, massive electrolysis plants, and spanning continents with new transmission lines are monumental.
Truly staggering amounts of energy.
But across all the diverse scenarios the researchers ran, the global EROI stabilizes and stays well above 10.
And 10 is the magic number in energy economics.
Why is 10 the magic number?
It is widely considered the absolute minimum energy return on investment required to sustain a highly complex modern civilization.
Okay, so if we fall below 10,
If a society's ERI drops down to, say, 5, you are looking at a fundamentally different world. At an EROI of 5, a huge portion of the population has to be directly involved in basic energy and food production. You lose the surplus energy required to run data centers, advanced healthcare systems, universities, and high-tech manufacturing.
wow. It would basically push us back toward an agrarian-style distribution of labor just to keep the lights on.
Exactly the risk.
Yeah.
But this study mathematically proves that we will not bankrupt our global energy reserves by making this transition. We generate enough surplus energy today to successfully build the machine that will sustain us tomorrow without sacrificing our modern standard of living.
But it requires a meticulously interconnected grid and a heavy reliance on the most efficient technologies.
Absolutely.
Which leads me to a final thought for you to mull over. Literally since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, our entire civilization has relied on the EROI of extracting finite, highly concentrated stocks of energy from deep underground coal, oil, and natural gas. Our entire modern geopolitical map, our alliances, and our wars have been drawn around who controls access to those finite stocks.
Which leaves us with a really profound question.
What's that?
If our future relies instead on harvesting continuous decentralized flows of energy that pass over borders freely, like the wind and the sun, how might that shift in the fundamental physics of power eventually dismantle and reshape the structure of global wealth and geopolitical dominance?
Wow. I mean, it is not just a transition of electrical infrastructure. It is a transition of global influence.
It is a complete rewrite of what power means, both physically and politically.
That is incredible to think about. Well, we want to thank you for joining us on this exploration of the raw physics driving our future grid. As always, the source material that anchored our deep dive today is the study titled System-Wide Energy Return on Investment for Power Systems. Keep questioning the systems building the world around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.